what's good? Good morning, good morning. It's your boy Wally J, and today I'm bringing you something special. This is something that's really actually close to my heart. I really wanted to start talking about books. I've been a relatively avid reader in the past couple of years. I definitely would not say that for my earlier years, but I recognize how much it can like change your life, change your perspective, do different things. So I'm hoping that number one, I can share these things with you guys, but also like kind of have this as like my running notebook slash list as I'm able to just kind of talk about what I'm learning. And ultimately I'll be able to kind of share more things. So I'm going to try and always have a theme around what we're talking about right now. I've been really wanting to get into what society has and like understanding society, why it's is the way it is essentially. Funny enough, I watched the Barbie movie and it spurred these thoughts, oddly enough. So, and that's, I guess I could share why. That was because in the Barbie movie, he talks a lot, or they talk a lot about just the social norms that we have and how we probably need to maybe readdress them, talk about them, whatever, just readdress what we're looking at, right? Because maybe we have been looking at them incorrectly. So what I was thinking is if the Barbie movie has this stance that it's taking right now and this view of the world, right? And I think we all can kind of agree that there was some level of truth in that movie, but also a level of bullshit if we're just keeping it a stack. Why is it that we've gotten to that point? What kind of went into getting us here, and why are we here, right? So that's what I kind of wanted to hop into. So I definitely went through. I've asked and looked at and got a list, excuse me, of books that focus on essentially societal norms, and getting into these different topics. So first we're going to do nonfiction, obviously more of the history of things and getting into what that looks like. There's going to be a book called The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, Sapiens, which I'm going to be talking about today, Bowling Alone, which I think is going to be really, really interesting. Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of the American Community by Robert D. Putnam. The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt. I do have that one here. That's probably going to be my next read. And then The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. I actually was going to read The Culture Code. I'm surprised I don't have it. I think I actually have it on my Audible. So I plan to get into that one as well. I think I might do an audiobook version of that one, but I'll probably listen to it like 2 or 3 times, getting into that. So I'll talk about the other. I guess we're also going to get into fiction and sociological perspectives. So I'll get into those categories maybe a little bit later, but for now we're going to be focusing on the nonfiction, the history, and get into it. So today we're going to be talking about Sapiens. Sapiens, this book is actually a freaking banger. I'm not even that far into the book. I'm on chapter 4, as you can see, 62 pages in. So I'm going to go from chapter 1 and just kind of talk about maybe like the main idea that I'm grabbing, or really there's like 2 main ideas I feel like I can grab from kind of every chapter. And essentially what it talks about is we used to be an animal of no significance, right? So a lot of people talk about how, like, if you would really put us out in the wild right now, if we didn't have our, our homes, our weapons, all of these things, we probably would be somewhere kind of low on the food chain, if I'm honest, right? Maybe like right in the middle, just because we're bigger than a lot of things. But even then, it's like some of these things that are just as big as us, or even like slightly smaller, they are equipped with some things that can easily take us out, right? And we still have to worry about them to this day. So the big question is, what happened and why did that change? I thought this was really interesting. So there are 3 big important revolutions in the course of history: the cognitive, the agriculture, and the scientific. Obviously, I think we talk about a lot about the agricultural and the scientific revolution. Not a lot of people get into the cognitive revolution. This is my first time kind of hearing about it, but it's essentially the time in which our brains started to grow, to my understanding. So it's actually funny. Us having a big brain is not conducive to natural selection. It actually does not make sense. To us have a bigger brain, it means it takes resources from the body, which means we would be weaker. And in a world where we're essentially going to live based off of how strong our bodies are back in the day, it was very non-conducive to what would make sense on how we would we on how we would evolve. Excuse me. That being said, like women were dying in pregnancy now more often because our heads were bigger. Another big thing is like our skeletal structure did not make sense for a larger head, right? Unless we were still on four legs. It does not make sense that when we got onto 2 feet, we now had this larger head that our body now had to carry. Where instead back on 4 feet, we probably would have had a lot better job, in my opinion, being able to do so, or maybe not. I don't know. But I just find that very, very interesting, as in it seems like this is the main point that said, hey, this is why you guys are going to be so different from any other animal in the world for us. But what this book talks about is how there was actually like hundreds, if not at least six different sapiens, right? So we're Homo sapiens. There are at least six different other species of humans over 70,000 years ago. And the question is, how did we end up with only one coming down to the end of it? And a big proponent of that, as well as how did we get to a point where we had bigger brains if it is not conducive with actually growing with natural selection, right? Basically, what he was saying is if you were to have a weaker body and a bigger brain, right? Just because you could think better does not mean you can actually go out and affect the world. But what this changed ultimately was now the communication between humans was kind of incomparable, right? Essentially, everything talks, everything has a ability to speak to itself. Even we look at chimpanzees and their communities, we were very much no different from them. We were in relatively small pools. We evolved based on the scenarios where we were on. There were Neanderthals up in the north. There was one that was actually a really tiny person out on an island, just because it didn't make sense to be extremely large to be on an island. Our lifestyle then really did not change too much from a chimpanzees or the organization of gorillas, or even, if I'm honest, elephants, right? Elephants are, right now you can tell that they like to move in packs, they communicate very well, they tend to their young, those different types of things, right? Us actually growing a bigger head meant more of our women would die in pregnancy. It actually meant that we needed to be born prematurely, and that is why when babies are born as humans, as Homo sapiens, I should say. I'm going to use the word sapiens, kind of like how he does, because there's going to be a whole lot of Homo whatevers, but sapiens is essentially what we are. And sapiens means that we're going to come out with an enormous head, an enormous brain, and we are going to be downloading so much information, right? That's why in our first 5, really to 10 years, we're in this really huge developmental phase, and we can't do anything for ourselves in our first couple of years, right? We have to learn everything. This is actually very interesting. The only thing different from us and animals is that we can talk about and believe in myths. And what that means is we have the ability to believe in God. We have the ability to believe in things that are not there. We have the ability to believe in concepts and understand and have a level of understanding before we ever come into it, right? Like we have a story that we're telling in our head that we haven't, we have an understanding of, and now we're able to start living in these larger, extremely large communities. Before they were saying without that, you might be able to be in a band of like 100 to 150. Obviously, that pales in comparison to our cities having millions of peoples in them, right? So pretty cool though. Honestly, I thought that was a very interesting thought, like the fact that we are connected not through the facts, but ultimately through things that we cannot touch, things that we have to agree upon, things that we have to see for ourselves. Another big thing that I noticed, kind of talking about us in an earlier stage, before I kind of get into us when we were in these bigger groups. He did use the idea of corporations to kind of drive that point home. So the idea that like you can sue a corporation, right? A corporation isn't actually a being or a thing or anything really. It's just this idea of, hey, I own this, or this thing, whatever it is, owns this, but we agree that there's an entity that owns, let's say, this car company, right? So you're not going to go after the owner of the car company, the sapien. You're going to go after this concept of an idea in the corporation. And that's how we're kind of able to, it's funny, like that's just how we're able to like actually grow and be in larger groups of people, and have these common myths, right? So I think that's a big reason why like religion was so big, in the agricultural revolution. I haven't gotten to that point yet. I do think they'll talk about it a little bit later, but I feel like that's a big reason why religion became so big in the agricultural revolution, because people had, they just had to believe in the seed that was in the ground, right? They had to believe that, hey, what they were putting in and what they were doing was going to be worth something in the longer run. And I would ultimately say too that it seems like when we started getting into that space, we were looking for deeper meaning, right? Because our minds were getting stronger, our minds were thinking bigger, we were having these foreign concepts. We were now kind of getting into the idea of what's our significance here, and why are we doing the things that we're doing, right? But yeah, no, all in all, this is a really, really good book. I highly recommend it. And I wanted to kind of talk about more of what happened. So right now I'm in this third chapter. It's called The Day in the Life of Adam and Eve. And it just talks about how what we were doing before, when we were kind of in these more hunter-gathering foraging groups, and how these groups actually formed our society way before, or they have so much influence on our society today than we think of, right? Have you guys have you guys heard of the topic of how hunter gatherers used to be, morning and night people, and now if you're a night owl or a early bird, it's probably in your genes, right? It goes back over 70,000 years to the hunter gatherer generation. I thought something that was also interesting in this hunter gathering generation, people were a lot healthier. People still live to 60, 70 years old. They were saying like a good 5 to 6% of the population was over 60 years old. That's kind of interesting, really interesting to think about, especially they have obviously a very low life expectancy, because obviously women were dying in pregnancy. You also had a lot of infant mortality, so that really drove it down. But essentially, once they got past those first formative years, they were golden, right? And they actually lived better lives, more, I don't want to call them more chill, because they still had to go out and they still had the harshes of the world. But what they had to worry about was, hey, what am I eating today, and who am I around today? And it was really cool, because something else that I wanted to talk about before it looks like they really got into religion, they did have somewhat of a belief system, most of these sapiens, and they called it animist, animist. I thought they had a different word, but essentially what animist means is that every living being, kind of like string theory, has this rhythm, has this way to communicate with each other. And it's funny, I was literally, I'm gonna put up a short here, but it's funny, like you see all of these shorts all the time of these people like taking care of these animals, or like moving, and these animals doing stuff, and they just understand like what their human wants, or like you get these wild beasts even, and they're like, once they get into this space with you, it's like you're not this wild beast, right? Like you're my friend, you're somebody who I can communicate with. And that's a big part of this agricultural revolution. It comes from this animism, the idea that everything has a soul or a spirit, and we can speak to it, and it can resonate with us, right? So a lot of stuff that they were doing, right? They, number one, didn't think that, hey, I am the alpha, right? I am not the alpha species. There's a big thing here. They understood that this world was about give and take. They understood that this world was, hey, we are all interliving and intermingled. Just because I need something from you does not mean that, I can't be thankful for your sacrifice. And that was a lot of what they did here. They said, hey, whatever it is, they would speak directly to a deer or directly to what they were hunting and say, hey, I don't want to I'm not obviously trying to be, you know, malicious, but we do need to live, and this is kind of like the cycle of life, and we understand that cycle, and people ultimately understood, hey, if it's my time to die, it's my time to die. Um, they also talked about a lot how um, the world before maybe was even way more violent than it is now, and the big thing is you can't really understand what these guys had going on, what these groups and tribes across the lands had going on, because we do not know the myths that they were essentially walking out. One of the descriptions they were talking about was there was a couple. It looks like a son and a daughter, and they were probably in the ages of 10, 11, and 10 or 11 or 12, and they were buried with 10 thousands of ivory beads. Hundreds of fox teeth. This meant that these two children had master craftsmen crafts them things from 4 or 5 years ago in order to be able to give them all of these items. And it's very interesting to think about, because were they already building those things? Was it a situation where they were building it because they were being raised up to somewhere? Or is this a situation where they were, maybe this was a special child and they had no idea what it was, but when they passed away, they had to honor them at a higher level. Maybe it was the patriarchy, and these two children were a part of that, and they died early, so they had a decent burial, rather than maybe a low ranking. You have no idea, and that's all because we do not understand the myths that they were talking about. We don't have the understanding of what myths they were moving through. All we have is the physical evidence that we can get from the bones or the bodies or these different types of things. But it is definitely shared to say that we may have had some pretty violent wars back in the day, depending on where you were. But it also looks like some places would have very little or no war at all. So, well, essentially what it's saying is violence and war is not something inherent to a person or a people. It is definitely inherent to maybe the myths that you're speaking to yourself, or ultimately the situation or area that you're in, right? Maybe you're in an area where it's a lot more scarce, and the resources are not as available, right? And there are actually spots that show that whole spaces got completely wiped out. Whole groups of people got wiped out, probably because another group came in and needed what they had, right? So all in all, I've been really enjoying this book. A couple of really strong takeaways I just wanted to share to kind of round out this recording is number one, we definitely were not the strongest. We were a group of people, and actually say we were multiple groups of people that eventually stood upright, and that eventually started growing bigger minds, that eventually started using tools, and that actually took us to a point where we now became very quickly at the top of the food chain. And that's why we're kind of in this imbalance of we have just continued to grow in population like crazy. Most things, as they evolved right into that apex predator, right, there were other checks and balances in place, and there were other things that were put in place where now we're kind of like in an unlimited capacity. Another big thing, the next point I'll make is that the reason we can have big and large group durations is because of the stuff that we believe that we cannot touch. And that does not mean it's a lie. It does not mean that there is something there that we are being manipulated by. It is truly the beliefs that we live by, right? And the understandings that we can have across, the world even. Another thing I'll talk about is how our brains and the fact that they grew was not a part of natural selection. It was definitely something that if things went how nature, I guess, would say, right? If we didn't really influence it because of how big our brains got, we probably would have been in a different space and be a completely different looking species right now. But because we were able to grow these brains and actually use them in a way that put us into an apex predator position, it's kind of cool because it's literally the definition of, hey, how did you use this? Right? How are you using this? And that's kind of where we're at. I thought it was really cool too, because the biggest I think proponent on why it would be bad is in order to have a baby now, it's almost like a 50-50 chance whether or not the mother's going to come out alive. So that would mean that instead of being able to grow a population, you're essentially always being right in the middle. Obviously, we've been able to develop some things that kind of have helped that and prevent that as much. We don't really have pregnant, or excuse me, birth mortality as much. But that who's to say that wasn't something that maybe I would even say this in the past was supposed to be kind of the limiting factor that we would have. But obviously, we're in a space now. We're pretty cool. And then I am really excited. The last point I'll make is I'm really excited to hear about the point in which we will in which this point is going to talk about when we really started getting into religion. I haven't really gotten into what that looks like right now. They're talking about animism, which obviously everything has a spirit and a soul. We understood that we are not, you know, the gods on this earth, or we're not like in relationship with some gods that have created this earth. And understanding where and how that kind of got there, because that I think is obviously when, you know, large groups and even bigger groups of people started to form. And the last point I'll just kind of make is we probably need to go back to hunter gathering. We probably need to go back to apprentice and mentorships, because they actually provide so much more for us in the long run, right? Like a lot of people don't recognize this, but scientific, and I would even say this, the Industrial Revolution only happened about 100 to 150 years ago. So we really didn't start working jobs. We really didn't start this 9-to-5 struggle until about 150 years ago. Think about that. And that 150 years is being generous. It's probably less than that. It's probably more like 100 tops. And what we were doing before was mentorships and apprenticeships. Yes, it may have taken longer for you to become a master in something, but when you became that master, you were going to be proficient, and you were going to be somebody who, number one, had a very large proponent in society, not only to do what you became a master of, but also to pass it on to the next person. I thought another big thing that's cool is this idea of a community raises children comes from this space of hunting and gathering, foraging, because a lot of people at that time didn't know that it was one man and one woman that made a baby. There was actually some tribes that believed that you needed to have sex and allow for you needed to have sex with multiple masters so that, you know, somebody could have the you know, the DNA of the greatest warrior, the DNA of the greatest storyteller, the DNA of the greatest you know, hunter, whatever it is, right? So that their child would ultimately have all of these traits that when they came out, they would be the best, right? We didn't learn that till later, and that might be a big reason why, you know, paternally, that's why we started going. So with that, that's pretty much the first 3 chapters of Sapiens. I don't know if I'll do it by every 3 chapters, or if I might even just make this super short and really dive into a chapter on the days that I'm looking to do it. I have not fully decided on that. I don't know if this will be like a every couple of day thing or an everyday. I am reading every day, so I was thinking it might be an everyday thing. Just kind of share some nuggets with you guys, but it also may be better to have, you know, kind of bigger sections. But regardless, I think at the end of all of these, depending on whatever book I go through, I'm probably going to go ahead and get a summary and kind of combine all of these videos so you can kind of get a start to finish of what I was thinking through that entire book. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope that you guys do see some value in what is going on here. Hopefully you guys are starting to think, and maybe these topics have you wanting to go dive into as well. With that, I would definitely say just leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you definitely comment down below whether or not you're a big reader. Just give me a thumbs up if you're a reader. I would love to know that. And yeah, we'll go through that. And if you're not a reader, go ahead, give me a thumbs down. And it's okay, bro. I'll read for you. You can tune into the videos. And I'd also love to hear any like book recommendations always. Maybe more on topics, right, to dive into. But yeah, always down to hear and learn with you guys. So I will definitely catch you guys on the next one. This is Wally JTV, and I am out. Peace.